The planet Zarkesh 7 was, by all definitions, a dump. A big, dusty, airless dump littered with the wreckage of a war so old that even the people who fought it were extinct. That didn't stop humans from poking around, of course. Give an archaeologist a rock, and they'll tell you it's probably cursed and worth a fortune. Ethan Carter, ex-soldier turned xenobiologist, had very little interest in curses or fortunes. He was here for one reason: to study what remained of the Drekthar, an ancient alien race infamous for designing biological war machines. The official term was engineered combat organisms. The unofficial term? Really bad ideas with too many teeth. "This place gives me the creeps," muttered Tessa, their team's communications specialist, as she scanned the ruins with her drone. "It's like the battlefield itself doesn't want us here." "Good," said Ethan, stepping over a half-buried chunk of alien armor. "That means we're on the right track." "You have a strange definition of right," Tessa replied. Ethan smirked but said nothing. His focus was on the massive skeletal remains jutting from the sand ahead. They were unlike anything he had ever seen. At least 10 meters long, reinforced with cybernetic plating, and built like something that had crawled straight out of a nightmare. The bones, still partially wrapped in decayed battle armor, suggested a creature with both biological and mechanical enhancements. This had to be one of the legendary Drekthar war beasts. And according to the data they'd pulled from the ruins, there was a good chance that one of them was still alive. "Okay," said Morgan, their team's engineer, adjusting his visor. "Hypothetically speaking, if we do find this thing, what's the plan?" "We study it," Ethan said. "And by study, you mean run for our lives if it tries to eat us, right?" "Obviously." The team fanned out, moving cautiously among the ruins. The air was thick with static interference, likely remnants of old war tech still flickering with dying energy. Ethan's scanner beeped softly, indicating an anomalous heat source beneath a collapsed section of the battlefield. "That's promising," he murmured. "Promising is not the word I would have used," Morgan said. "How about terrifying? Or stupid?" "Or..." A deep, guttural sound rumbled through the air. It was the kind of sound that made the hairs on the back of Ethan's neck stand up. Something was down there, and it was awake. Tessa's drone fed them an image from beneath the rubble. At first, it was hard to tell what they were looking at: a mass of scorched metal, battle-worn plating, and something that could have been decayed organic tissue. But then it moved. Slowly, the shape unfurled, revealing a massive, quadrupedal form. Armor plating lined its back, cracked and dented from centuries of battle. A single, glowing red eye flickered to life, scanning its surroundings. Its mouth, filled with serrated metal and bone, opened in a slow, mechanical snarl. "Well," Morgan whispered, "I regret everything." Ethan took a step forward, his pulse hammering. It was alive! Karzek! That was the name inscribed in the old war logs. One of the most feared war beasts of the Drekthar, a living weapon designed to outlast entire armies. And here it was, abandoned, forgotten, and still standing after centuries. "Okay," Tessa breathed, her voice barely above a whisper. "We should go now." Like immediately. Ethan didn't move. There was something in the creature's posture that held him in place. It was poised to attack, but there was hesitation, like it didn't know whether they were enemies or just very, very dumb intruders. "Don't." Tessa's voice had a distinct edge of panic now. "Don't do the thing, Ethan." "What thing?" "The thing where you try to befriend the monster." "I'm not." Ethan stopped. Okay, maybe he was doing the thing. Karzek let out a low, warning growl, but it wasn't the kind of growl that came right before something lunged. It was calculating, watching, waiting. Ethan took a slow step closer. The others wisely stayed exactly where they were. "This is such a bad idea," Morgan muttered. Ethan ignored him. He reached into his pack, pulling out a protein bar. He had no idea if a half-mechanical alien war dog ate protein bars, but it was better than nothing. Slowly, he extended his hand, Karzek's single glowing eye fixed on the offering. For a long, agonizing moment, the war dog didn't move. Then, with the kind of mechanical precision that suggested it could absolutely kill him in half a second, it leaned forward and sniffed. The growl subsided. "Holy!" Morgan's voice cracked. "Are you serious?" You're bribing the apocalypse with snacks? Ethan grinned. Everyone likes snacks. Karzak made a low, rumbling sound. Not quite a growl, but not quite anything else either. It was considering them, deciding. The thing about engineered war beasts, Ethan knew, was that they weren't just mindless weapons. The Drekthar had bred them to be intelligent, calculating, strategic, and terrifyingly self-aware. And this one, abandoned for centuries, probably hadn't seen another living being in a very, very long time. Ethan didn't see a mindless killer. He saw something tired, something waiting. Tessa took a cautious step forward, her voice barely above a whisper. Is it deciding whether to eat you or not? Maybe. Karzak huffed. The sound was almost begrudging. Wait, Morgan said. Did we just become the first people to negotiate with a war beast using snack diplomacy? Ethan let out a slow breath. The war dog wasn't attacking. That was a start. Tessa exhaled. Okay, so what now? The answer to that was simple. They had just made first contact with an ancient, deadly, and possibly trainable alien war dog. Now they had to figure out what came next. Ethan had been in a lot of tense situations before. He'd survived ambushes, outmaneuvered bounty hunters, and once had an entire dinner with his ex's parents without dying of embarrassment. But standing 5 feet away from a half-mechanical alien war dog that could likely bite through starship hulls? This was a new one. Karzak stared at him, its single red eye glowing like a warning light. It was still deciding whether Ethan was an ally, an intruder, or an idiot. Probably the last one. Behind him, Tessa and Morgan were doing their best to stay quiet, which for Morgan meant whispering furiously. So, do we start running now or wait for the chewing sounds? Ethan ignored him and slowly extended another protein bar. Karzak didn't move. Maybe it had never been given food before. Maybe it had no idea what to do with kindness. He unwrapped the bar and placed it on the ground. The war dog sniffed, then, with mechanical precision, crushed it under one enormous paw. Cool, Ethan said. Not a snack guy. Got it? Karzak rumbled, a sound that could have been a warning or the war dog's way of saying, you are a very small, very dumb creature, and I am allowing you to live out of sheer curiosity. Tessa, still half hiding behind a rock, hissed, Ethan, this is a terrible plan. Have a better one? Yes. It involves not dying. But Ethan wasn't giving up yet. He'd seen something in Karzak's posture, a flicker of hesitation, a glimmer of intelligence. This thing wasn't just a programmed weapon. It was thinking, and that meant it could change. He took a slow step back, giving the war dog space. All right, no pressure. You take your time. To his surprise, Karzak didn't lunge or growl. Instead, it watched him, its head tilting slightly as if considering. Over the next few hours, Ethan kept his movements slow, his tone steady, and his supply of increasingly sacrificed protein bars steady. Karzak didn't attack, but it didn't relax either. It was like trying to befriend a landmine with trust issues. Then, progress. When Ethan sat down on a rock, exhausted, Karzak did the strangest thing. It took 2 slow steps forward, then sank down on its massive haunches. Not a threat, not an attack. Just watching. Tessa made a strangled sound. Is it bonding with you? Doubt it, Ethan muttered. Probably just waiting to see if I keel over. Morgan, now significantly braver from a distance, nudged a scanner closer. According to these readings, its nanotech is still active, but it's low on energy. That thing has been running on fumes for centuries. Ethan frowned. He'd assumed the war dog was battle-scarred, but up close, it was clear it was also malnourished, or the mechanical equivalent of it. Whatever it ran on, it hadn't had a proper recharge in ages. We should help it, he said. Tessa blinked. Help it how? This isn't a stray cat, Ethan. It's a living war crime. Morgan checked his datapad. Well, technically, if it's still following old combat programming, then it's in standby mode, awaiting orders from a proper handler. Ethan arched a brow. And who would that be? Morgan hesitated. Well, the director are all extinct, so technically you... Tessa groaned. Of course, because that's how our luck works. Ethan turned back to Karzak. The war dog was still watching him with that eerie intelligence, waiting. Maybe it didn't need an official handler. Maybe it just needed a reason. He took a risk. He reached out, not too close, but close enough to see if Karzek would react. The war dog didn't growl. It didn't flinch. Instead, it made a sound, something deep and rumbling, almost contemplative. That was when Ethan knew. This thing wasn't just a weapon. It had been waiting for someone to acknowledge it, to treat it as more than a machine left to rust. And for some reason, it had decided to entertain the possibility that Ethan was that someone. Tessa exhaled sharply. "I can't believe this is working," Morgan muttered. "I can't believe we're still alive." Ethan, for the first time in hours, smiled. "Looks like we got a new friend." Karzek huffed, the closest thing it had made to amusement. Maybe, just maybe, that wasn't such a ridiculous idea. The problem with adopting a half-mechanical, centuries-old alien war dog was that people tended to notice. And not the good kind of people. Ethan had just started to feel like Karzek might trust him, or at least tolerate his presence, when the universe, in its infinite wisdom, decided to make things difficult. The first sign of trouble was the deep space scanner lighting up with an inbound signal. The second was Morgan cursing loudly. "That," Morgan said, jabbing at his datapad, "is a pirate ship, and not the fun kind." Tessa's expression darkened. "There's a fun kind of pirate? The kind that doesn't shoot at you?" Ethan sighed, rubbing his temples. "Who are we dealing with?" "Wraithborn marauders," Morgan said grimly. "They raid old battlefields looking for salvage and high-tech war relics." As if on cue, Karzek lifted its massive head, sniffing the air. Its single red eye glowed brighter. It had spent centuries alone, but instinct still burned in its bones. It knew a fight was coming. Tessa's hand hovered over her pistol. "Please tell me we're leaving." Ethan didn't answer. He was watching Karzek. The war dog wasn't growling. It wasn't preparing to attack. It was waiting. For him. That was the moment Ethan realized Karzek had already made its choice. The war dog had been programmed to serve, to follow orders, but now it wasn't following some long-dead Drekthar general. It was following him. That realization settled into his bones like steel. He turned to Tessa and Morgan. "Get to the ship. If things go bad, take off." Morgan gawked. "And what? Just leave you here with Captain Murder Crew? I won't be alone." Ethan looked at Karzek. "Right, buddy?" The war dog huffed. Not a growl. Not a snarl. Something almost amused. Then the raiders landed. The ship came down hard, kicking up a storm of dust and debris. Figures emerged. Hulking aliens in scavenged armor, weapons gleaming in the pale light. Their leader, a particularly ugly reptilian with cybernetic implants, sneered at Ethan. "Nice pet," the raider drawled. "Hand it over, and maybe I won't kill you." Ethan smiled. "Oh, I think you're going to have a bad day." The leader chuckled. "You and what army?" Karzek rose. It was slow, deliberate, like an executioner preparing the blade. The war dog's plating locked into place, old combat systems humming to life. That single red eye burned like molten fury. The raiders hesitated. They knew what this was, what it had done. Too late. Karzek lunged. For something that had spent centuries buried in a wasteland, it moved like a living storm. It crashed into the nearest raider, sending the alien flying. Teeth met armor. Armor lost. The battlefield erupted into chaos. Ethan dove for cover as plasma bolts screamed past him. Tessa and Morgan provided covering fire from the ship's ramp, picking off raiders as they scrambled for cover. But Karzek was something else entirely. It didn't just fight, it dominated. One raider swung an electrified blade. Karzek caught it in its jaws, metal crunching like dry bone. Another tried to fire a high-powered plasma cannon. The war dog absorbed the energy through its cybernetic plating and sent it back in a pulse that knocked 3 raiders off their feet. Ethan had never seen anything like it, and for the first time, he wasn't afraid. He called out, "Karzek, cover me!" The war dog responded. It moved, shielding him as he advanced, cutting through the chaos with practiced efficiency. Ethan fired at the raider leader, forcing him to duck. The reptilian alien snarled, baring razor-sharp teeth. "This isn't over," he spat, slamming a button on his wrist. His ship's engines roared, preparing for takeoff. Ethan cursed. If they escaped, they'd come back with reinforcements. Karzek did not allow retreats. The war dog leaped. Not at the raiders. At the ship. It slammed into the hull. Claws tearing through metal like paper, the raider leader's eyes widened in sheer horror. That's not possible. Karzek made a sound, a deep, resounding boom that was not a growl, it was a statement. I'm not a relic. I'm not your weapon. I choose my fight. With one final, earth-shaking bite, Karzek tore through the ship's engine core. The vessel shuddered, alarms screaming as power died in a flickering, desperate gasp. The raiders ran. The leader barely made it 10 steps before Karzek landed in front of him, staring him down with that burning, unrelenting eye. The raider froze, shaking. Ethan stepped forward. You should go. The leader didn't argue. He turned and bolted, dragging the last of his men with him. Moments later, they disappeared into the wasteland. Silence. Karzek stood there for a long moment, watching them vanish. Then slowly it turned to Ethan. Ethan met its gaze. No words were spoken. None were needed. The war dog bowed its head. Not as a soldier, not as a weapon, but as something else. Tessa let out a shaky breath. Holy hell, I think you just adopted a war crime. Morgan laughed weakly. Yeah, well, I think the war crime adopted him back. Ethan reached out, resting a hand against Karzek's armored neck. The war dog rumbled, but this time, it wasn't a warning. It was content. Maybe for the first time in centuries, it wasn't waiting anymore. Maybe, just maybe, it had found its reason.